Greetings, everyone. My name is Kiyomi Rollins. I am the co-founder and the director of the Connect Cooperative, based in the historic Black community of Westview. Entrepreneurship of Black-owned businesses are vital and necessary to this country. We would not be here where we are as a society and as a culture without the soul of Black entrepreneurship. It is vital that organizations continue their support. Black-owned businesses are the original social impact entrepreneurs, right? So we're always making sure that not only that our business is rooted in culture and community, but we also have that mission of making sure that we are supporting the economic mobility of our neighbors by hiring from within our community, training within our community, and making sure, in addition to the success of our business, that our communities matter most and foremost to us. We are at so much risk with all that's going on with COVID, the pandemic, gentrification. It is necessary for institutions to be able to support Black-owned businesses beyond a mural, beyond a hashtag, beyond some social media friendly campaign. We need resources, access to capital, and we need the training to be able to help us to be able to exist in this new way. The mom and pop businesses, the smaller businesses, the barbershops, the culture and the hub of our communities need that support. That's where you're going to find your new innovators. Those are the ones that are in our community that also need that support. Welcome, 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 community. Thank you so much for joining in for our third final session, Open for Good Business. We're going to continue to explore these conversations around community wealth building, specifically around one of the tools that we love over here at the Connect, which is cooperative economics. So thank you all so much that have joined session 1, session 2, have been hanging out with us for this whole entire series. Hand clap to you all. Tonight is our final series, final session of our 3-part series for Open for Good Business. Tonight we have the amazing Kamau Franklin here. He's going to join us tonight to kind of share a little bit about some of the legal practices around cooperatives. And for those who don't know Kamau Franklin, he's an amazing brother. He is the founder and board president of Community Movement Builders. He has been a dedicated community organizer for over 20 years, beginning in New York and now based right here in the A. For 18 of those years, Kamau was a leading member of a national grassroots organization dedicated to the ideas of self-determination and the teachings of the Honorable Malcolm X. He has spearheaded organizing work in various areas, including youth organizing and development, police misconduct, and the development of sustainable urban communities. Kamau has coordinated and led community cop watch programs, liberation and freedom schools for youth, electoral and policy campaigns, large-scale community gardens, organizing collectives and alternatives to incarceration programs. With all of that, Kamau still found time to be an attorney in New York, where he practiced in criminal, civil rights, and transactional law, and now lives in Atlanta, Georgia, with his wife and his beautiful children. Kamau, can you say hello to the good people tonight?
Hello, good people. It's a pleasure to have to join you guys, to have you let me be on your show and to talk about cooperatives and sort of good practices for folks who are trying to start businesses and make sure that wealth is distributed amongst the workers of the cooperatives through ownership and revenue sharing.
Perfect, perfect, perfect. I always love how Black folks come together. We got to shout out our hoods and rep our communities. So Miss Sonia Genty, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right or correct. Jump right on in to shout out Pittsburgh. We see you. We see you. Thank you for joining the conversation. And so we're just going to jump right on in to kind of talk about what we think our thoughts are around cooperatives. One of the reasons that I wanted to bring Kamau onto the show, because we're having this conversation about what are some tools that we could do to sustain some existing legacy businesses in communities that are gentrifying or businesses that are looking or at risk for displacement. And one of the things, a lot of businesses are already practicing cooperative models. We see it in the space of shared spaces, merchants and businesses coming together under one space to be able to collectively, market their goods. We see it in the space where several artists or people who kind of do the same thing kind of come together. But we wanted to be able to really dive into this conversation to really explore how a business that is existing can explore what a worker cooperative or cooperatively shared space model looks like. And if you're a startup business, maybe you're in the space that you're pivoting your brand right now because of the pandemic. What are some ways we can kind of get your, business to that? And so, Kamal, one of the questions that if you could start off with is, can you just share what are the various types of cooperatives that exist?
There are numerous types of cooperatives, and we should start, with a little bit of a definition. A cooperative is a democratically owned, membership-based economic operation. So, what that basically means is that it's a company, it is a business, it is a revenue generating enterprise that is meant to share its profit and/or revenue amongst either a larger percentage of people. Usually, that is through workers. And worker cooperatives are one of the most popular or pronounced cooperatives. And worker cooperatives generally mean that the ownership of the company is divided amongst the folks who actually work to produce produce whatever goods are being created and/or whatever service is being given. And those workers not only share in ownership, but they democratically make decisions around how the business will operate. There's also consumer cooperatives. Consumer cooperatives are usually like cooperative grocery stores and things where those who shop and join as a member have a democratically let's say, control the company through a democratic means of voting for its board of directors, who then sort of set the agenda for who becomes the management and so forth. So worker cooperatives, just to wrap it up, worker cooperatives are probably far more in line with sort of revenue sharing and making sure that the people who actually are producing something share in the revenue, as opposed to consumer cooperatives, which doesn't necessarily do that to the same degree. So usually it's worker cooperatives that folks center in on when they want to talk about alternative economic structures, which sort of do away with the top-down management structure, which do away with the idea that one person or one of two or three people get to take all of the revenue and make the highest percentages of wages and/or income and/or bonuses, while workers make the least. This sort of flips that on its head and says, yes, there may even be a management class in worker cooperatives, but they are employed by the very workers themselves. And so that means they can be fired by the workers. But it also means when revenue sharing is talked about or done, it's done through a system in which the workers, and it can be done through various means, longevity, time involved in terms of the business operation, but it generally means that workers themselves distribute those profits amongst themselves and that they keep some of it in the business. And I'll say, depending on the ideology of the cooperative, which is, of course, very important, the cooperative also usually and or at times will keep a certain percentage to put back into the very community that it's either operating in and or saying claiming that it's operating for. So that's the basic outline of cooperatives, particularly local cooperatives.
So let me ask you this, Kamal. We've been having this conversation in our community between Westview, Weston, Pittsburgh Yards. So for a business that exists, like maybe there's a mom and pop restaurant that's been open for years, that have had employees that have been, employed there, for years, and then maybe that business owner is looking at, retiring. What advice or what strategies can that business owner, look to in terms of converting their traditional, business to one that is a worker owner cooperative? And why
Mhm.
would that be important for that legacy business to consider that as a tool?
Well, I'll start with the second part of the question first. It's important because a lot of the legacy businesses don't necessarily have somebody to pass that business down to. A lot of times, some of these businesses are not profitable enough to sell to an outside business or an outside interest who would want to come in and take it over. And so sometimes you have these legacy businesses that they go under when their ownership decides that they're going to retire, like you said, or they're going to just close the business down. So it's important a lot of times for both new businesses and older businesses that are looking to convert to think about what it is that gets the most people sort of invested in the idea of keeping this business going, of keeping this operation running. It's been shown through statistical analysis that cooperatives, they are obviously a much smaller percentage of the economy, but they do much better than single owner or ownership, which is top down because of the enthusiasm of the worker owner in terms of putting in time. They have their livelihood is dependent on it in a way that they see themselves sharing revenue, and it's not just a job which they will sort of do one day and then leave the next. This is something they can invest in as a part of what they do for a longer period of time. And again, that sense of ownership really keeps people coming, wanting to commit themselves fully to the business. So there's a lot of good reasons of that nature for folks to consider either again transferring or looking at new styles of ownership that make sure that the business keeps running and make sure that the business keeps running profitably, and then lastly to make sure it does as much community good as possible if that is one of the interests that the individual owner may have in terms of keeping the business going.
Do we, and Kamal, can you think of in your 20 years of this community work, and activism, do you have any
30,
examples of
30.
30?
Yeah, I'm
Do
old.
you,
I'm
what
old.
examples do you have of businesses where you saw that it was a traditional mom and pop legacy business that did that conversion? They were able to do that successfully.
Well, I don't know if I have individual examples of that as much as I have examples of, historically speaking, cooperatives have always been a part of the Black economy, right? Everyone from Fannie Lou Hamer to other people have used cooperatives not only during the time of segregation, but as a sustainable model of business operation, which again shares revenue amongst Black folks to make sure that we have as much resources as possible. And so the idea of cooperatives they're sort of making this comeback over the last, I would say, 7 to 10 years as something that's sort of fashionable or something that people are interested in terms of duplicating or recreating. But they are definitely something that has a long time history in the Black community around keeping businesses going, making sure wealth was spread as far as possible, having collective ownership, democratic ownership. There's a place in the history of our community for doing this. And there's a comeback to that that's happening now. So there's several cooperative organizations. I'm on the board of Cooperation Jackson, which is a cooperative of an organization that's made up of several different cooperatives in Jackson, Mississippi, which came out of something called the Jackson Plan, where they have several different cooperatives that are running, and they help fund those cooperatives. Our organization, Community Movement Builders, has started several different cooperatives. One of the ones that's now at a point of sort of being built to scale is a sea moss cooperative, where we sell both dry sea moss and the gel in local stores here in Atlanta and Seven Onda and another store called Nuts and Berries, which are being built out. We are over the next 3 or 4 months, we'll probably hire actually our first worker who will be trained to be a worker owner. So again, these types of structures, I think because of the economic malaise that we are in as a community, the loss of wealth, of individual wealth, of family wealth, that's been sort of since the Great Recession, something that's been something we've had to deal with, and then something that people have been estimating against through statistical analysis is going to wind up being close to zero. Just imagine that as a community, that the wealth that we get to pass on to family members into larger communities is expected to hit a zero ratio, whereas white wealth is expected to continue to grow at a pace that is like 10 times as much as what black wealth is. So we need to think of alternative business structures, as well as other ideas to make sure that our community can survive what's happening in America at this particular time.
Yeah, and shout out just that amazing work that's happening, in Jackson. I think Cooperation Jackson is always just this, the bar is kind of set and established, there. It's something that's happening in real time now. But then also to kind of go back to, what you said, that we just have this history, of cooperatives existing, in our community. One of my other thoughts is when we have several business owners within the Connect that are pivoting, out of corporate, America, during the pandemic, they're trying to be resilient as Black folks, can be, and really trying to think about, starting a new company and a brand, but starting it, as a cooperative. Is it challenging to start a business as a cooperative versus having something that already exists and converting it over to a worker owner cooperative?
I think it just depends on who's starting a business and or converting. So if a lot of this is if you are working with a group of people and the idea is already that each individual person should have ownership interests, and these are the folks that are going to start off the first layer of workers, then I think the idea of cooperative could naturally flow from the work that you were doing. A lot of times, also, you have nonprofits who help guide organizations or business ideas into cooperative models because people are just not as used to those as they are to sort of the development that they're told is sort of the natural way to do things, which is sort of an individual capitalist enterprise, and everyone thinks they're going to be sort of Horatio Alger or the story of from rags to riches, and so that's kind of the idea that people usually go into it with. But cooperatives, again, they are sustaining because they they make sure that the wealth is divided up more in terms of the people who are working at the cooperative, as opposed to someone who's making minimum wage or making living off of tips, who definitely will have higher turnover, right? Because they don't have a reason to necessarily stay and help the business grow. What they're interested in is, can I get my paycheck? Because I probably have to go rush off to my other minimum wage job, or I have to go take care of some daily concerns with childcare or educational needs or family care or even recreational stuff. Anything to get out of this space, which is paying me sort of the minimum for my labor. So I think the cooperative model again excites people, and it's something that can help build wealth. So I think it's really depends on what it is that what's the intention a lot of times. So if it is an individual starting a company, where they see themselves fitting into the larger community. The cooperatives are as much a business model as they are an ideological model. And so what I mean by that briefly is a lot of folks who are politicized, like myself, they like the idea of cooperative because they're democratic sounding, worker controlled. But a lot of folks who are politicized have no business acumen whatsoever. And so they think about starting cooperatives or hoping to develop cooperatives, but they forget the very nature of a cooperative is that it's a business. And so you have to have an idea that helps start that business and keep that business going. And so the people who have a sort of an ideology or around it may be very interested in keeping this going, but unless there's that passion for a certain idea, that can get lost, right? And so that ideology is important to make sure that when you're doing a cooperative, that you are seeing the need of it is for more than just me as an individual to make as much profit as possible, right? If that's your idea, if that's your mindset, then obviously a cooperative is not for you if you have a certain particular idea. And so that's why you have to tie together sort of an ideology that's around community, that's around shared resources, that's around improving the life conditions of people, with the idea of what is this economic idea that can actually sell, that people would want to buy, that's important for them in their lives. Um, because obviously without that, then you're just having meetings with people to talk about the structure of something, which there's no economic idea behind it whatsoever, or no one has the fortitude or the knowledge to make it happen. So.
And so we got Ronnie Galvin, who led our first session. He just said, "That's right, Kamau. The current system ain't working for us." Brother Michael said, "Peace, family." As Ronnie is on, one of the things that I was kind of thinking about, and just as you were sharing, your feedback, there's this idea or the concept around scaling enough of that, product or that service. You mentioned, you have this great, cooperative with the CMOS that's in several, locations based here in Atlanta. In our first session, Ronnie shared about creating a product or service that could kind of be sourced to an anchor institution in the community, like a hospital, university, or something to be able to build, that capital. What are, I think, just maybe some legal strategy or legal advice for a cooperative who may find themselves, in this space? They have a product and they want to be able to scale. We know for any, small business individually, that's a challenge. But as it presents it to a cooperative, so we can use the example of the CMOS. What challenges have you all experienced with just trying to scale it to be able to meet the demand of these two, institutions that want to be able to support the cooperative?
Yeah, I think some of the issues of scaling start off with the idea of um, how much time and effort can be put into a cooperative at the beginning when no one is getting paid, right? So again, that may be similar to a small business, as in an individual puts in that time to make their business run because it's their dream. And I think a cooperative has some of those same elements or issues. How do you move it along at a pace where again you can start people, and it's not necessarily volunteer labor, but it is something in which people are getting compensated for. Now, of course, we're doing this within the structure of a nonprofit, so we have a little bit more time to make that happen, right? But I think cooperative businesses face the same challenges that small businesses do, which is around acquiring capital. And there are some loan funds that are starting to develop here in Atlanta. There's the Organization for Human Rights and Democracy, which is starting a cooperative loan fund here. And so there are some opportunities now for cooperative enterprises to get some resources that they can use towards their business. But those same limitations apply because what we're working in is a capitalist structure, right? And is a cooperative doesn't necessarily change that. It democratizes the individual businesses, but those individual businesses are still operating under a supply and demand model. They're operating under a model in which marketing is important, in which publicity at times is important, which is salesmanship is important. All of those standard business practices apply. And so for cooperatives to succeed, in essence, they do have to compete in some ways with let's say, capitalist or standard business enterprises. It's just that when the cooperative again can lift itself up and be a relatively successful model, the dividends of that get literally paid back to more people. And those people are also the folks that get to make the decision. So I will also say within a cooperative model, people have to be willing and open that the decision making is democratic, right? It's probably going to be a consensus decision making model where, if it's a small cooperative, a small worker cooperative at first, where folks are saying, look, we have to have a consensus if we're going to move forward and produce X more amount of product to sell in these particular stores, or to do this kind of thing, or to borrow money from this person or this institution, and to do ABC with it. We need to have a consensus to say we're going to put this aside, this amount of revenue to be redistributed into community programs. Those things at first will take consensus amongst its workers. And then as you get bigger as a cooperative, it might become sort of a majority structure or a two-thirds majority structure, because since consensus will probably never be reached when you have a cooperative that has well over 50, 100, 200 members, right? So at that particular stage in the cooperative's lifespan, it becomes important to think about what majority and do a supermajority voting looks like, to make sure again that the cooperative is staying true to its mission. So going back quickly to the ideological statement, uh, because we're talking about people making money, right? Resources being made. There's a ideological development, a political education, as we say in politicized communities, that is really needed around cooperatives, so that we don't fall into old habits of wanting to retain and or keep all resources that come in, and then we start thinking about cutting corners, or again, just doing things that standard businesses will sometimes do, particularly large corporations, where it's about less about safety, more about product, less about health, more about selling of the product. So there has to be a good political education component to a cooperative, so it doesn't fall back into the simple idea of we should make as much profit as possible to
Sure.
everybody gets rich, as opposed to thinking about some of the fundamentals of why cooperatives got started, which again is to distribute resources not only to the individual cooperative ownership, the workers, but also to think about what are the needs of the larger community that the cooperative is either helping to serve and or the people in the cooperative come from.
Thank you for that, Kamau. Ronnie shared cooperatives allow us to practice democracy in the context of our communities and our local economies. The practice translates to the bigger democracy. And then Michael has a question. He says, Kamau, what are the pitfalls for cooperatives as it pertains to co owned housing and the funding needed to develop co owned housing? What are your thoughts, Kamau?
Well, I think that you have. I don't think you have a lot of this in Atlanta, but you have a lot of this in New York, and again, of cooperative apartments buildings, which are similar to condos, right? Except in cooperatives, you own shares as opposed to your physical space. So a lot of times, again, when people start cooperatives, they turn into standard business operation. So as opposed to worrying if a cooperative member can pay their mortgage or pay their monthly fee, cooperative fee, we worry about that more than we worry about what is the financial condition of the person who somehow cannot now pay that or is going to be late on that. What do we do to keep that person in the cooperative, as opposed to how is that person becoming a drag on the cooperative? And so therefore, let's institute these legal measures to get them out. So the problems that cooperatives have, I think, for the most part, is that they start to fall back into old paradigms of capitalist economic thinking. Like, hey, we got these other bills to pay. If this one doesn't pay, then we have to get that done. As opposed to if we're in this together and
Yeah.
this cooperative is something that we started together, how do we continue to build it, even when one cooperative member, in terms of cooperative housing, may be struggling and so they can't pay their share this month of this or their share of that? Is there something else that they can do in terms of hours or being worked in a garden in the cooperative or cleaning up around the common areas? So those kind of ideas have to be thought through when starting a cooperative, because what happens again is that people they fall back not only to old habits, but they use the old strategies of literally people start lawyering up and they'll sue and they're looking for this, they're looking for that. This cooperative in New York, I won't call its name, but it was a cooperative housing situation, and lucky it's still going. But they're very politicized people when they started the cooperative, and at some point, a lot of the members of the cooperative left. They moved out of the house that was a shared ownership interest, and then when they moved out, and a few of the original cooperative owners stayed in, the ones who moved out wanted to then sell the house, right? And they wanted to sell it for top value for profit. And the ones who remained, they didn't want to. They said this cooperative idea can still go on. Just because you decided to leave, it doesn't mean that the cooperative has ended. And so that turned actually into a legal battle, right? And so again, these were people who have had political education, they were activists and organizer types, but still the danger of the cooperative is that it falls back into the old habits. I think also the dangers that cooperative structure for, let's say, banks or loan operations, sometimes it may look funny for them, right? They may not be used to that. They may
Yeah.
ask for additional information on it, additional materials, and so they might be a little harder unless you know where to look to find the sort of adequate funding and or investment that's needed to make the cooperative grow to scale. So I think these kind of things may put an extra burden on general cooperatives, but in particular housing cooperatives, usually because a lot of those are shared space, whether or not it's an actual house or it's an apartment space, and where people quite literally personalities and getting on each other's nerves play just as much of a role in how the economic fortunes of the business operate, as do whether or not this was a good idea. And if one person leaves, How do you have those structures and those bylaws that help make sure that there's a proper way to carry that cooperative forward, so that people understand that one leaving doesn't mean that the whole cooperative is ended now. It just means that you have to bring somebody else in. You have to think about
Sure.
what are the ways in which you keep it going.
Sure. And Kamal, before I go into, before I comment, I just want to share Miss Makisha. She asked, is there any particular business structure that is better for converting to a cooperative? Kamal, if you don't mind, Miss Makisha, Kamal kind of touched on that earlier. Kamal, if you don't mind, just kind of sharing a little bit of that, to kind of go circle back to that.
Yeah.
And I also kind of want to bring up, I don't think you nor I have spent some time and energy just on that development piece. So when we're talking about those bylaws, we're just talking about the actual structure. I think that's super, super, super critical. I also think it's highly necessary to involve somebody like Kamau or an attorney just to be able to kind of walk through that process, just to be able to develop that. So yes, Miss Makisha, she just asked, is there any particular business structure that is better for converting to a cooperative? Also, J Mack said, so structuring the guidelines is the most important item for starting a co-op. Yes, J Mack, yes. But Kamal, can you touch on those, please?
Yes. So the best business structure is probably the LLC if it's already a business, right? So some of this is state by state. So individual states, some don't have cooperative structures as part of their state formations of businesses. So, for example, here in Georgia, there's not a cooperative structure. You can't form a cooperative in Georgia. You can form what's called a limited liability company, and that in general has some very similar dynamics to cooperatives because the limited liability company is, its members are the owners, and those members own based on percentages, not necessarily not on shares of stock per se. So limited liability companies (LLCs) are the best ways to start thinking about how to create cooperatives, if you're already establishing a business, or if you live in a state that doesn't have cooperative laws. If you live in a state that already does have cooperative laws, or if you want to be adventurous and say, I want to incorporate in another state and just run the business in the state that doesn't have cooperative laws, you can do that too. But for those that have cooperative laws, you can form a cooperative under those guidelines, and start running your business. You can also, for some cooperatives, based on what their purpose is, you can not only form the business as a cooperative, but you may even be able to get 501c3 status, nonprofit status, tax exemption status at this federal level, depending on your purpose of your cooperative. So the other thing that was mentioned is the guidelines and or structure. So the bylaws and or articles of incorporation, the membership structure become very important for cooperatives, so that they, again, mirror what your intention is. So there's very clear within your structure if how do you bring on new members? How does somebody go from a worker to a worker owner? What's the idea around someone leaving the structure, and what does they pay out, if anything? So those things should be worked out. What is the voting system like? Is it, again, a consensus system? Does it raise to a certain higher percentage when the numbers increase? Does it switch over to a majority and or a supermajority? Those are the things that it's important to work out. What is the creating, depending on, again, the structure of the cooperative? Is there going to be a board that runs the cooperative business? Is there going to be a management company, again, depending on the size of the cooperative, that gets hired to manage the company, right? Sometimes, again, even if you're a worker cooperative and you have some ideas about how to start a business, once you scale, it may be something that, at least in the short to medium term, is beyond the capacity of what the workers may know at that particular time. And a lot of times, cooperatives bring on management, professional management companies, right? And so that has its pros and cons. If it's a professional management company, they may have some experience, but they definitely begin to run businesses like traditional top-down businesses, right? Usually they believe their idea is to increase revenue and or the profit of the business as much as possible. So you have to know what type of management company you're hiring, what's their background, have they ever dealt with cooperatives before? And some businesses decide to be just strictly managed by the member owners, which again means it could mean a slower uptick in terms of scaling, because depending on the business experience of those folks, it may take a little bit more time to get scaled because those folks may be learning and undergoing training at the same time they're running an actual business. So I think all of that is important to work out in the operating agreement and or bylaws of the particular cooperative business that's being created, so that you have something to refer to when you start your business and or when unfortunately either conflict or differences in management style decisions start to creep up and you have to figure out ways in which you solve these issues and problems.
Mm-hmm. And so, Kamal, that makes me think about for a business that may already be, existed. I think you and I have had, one of these conversations. Is there a way to explore some type of hybrid of the cooperative? Like maybe your business has already existed, and you want to maybe walk up to, or maybe scale the ownership model of your, employees or community folks into ownership of, the business. So maybe you could, you're open, in real time. So as you're trying to create the bylaws, operating agreement. Can you just share a little bit like how there could be maybe a hybrid, like maybe there's a percentage of ownership that legacy family business owner still retains while opening it up, to cooperative members.
Yeah, and I think you sort of nailed it with that example. So cooperatives can operate under hybrid structures, and just like businesses, you can have different percentages of ownership, right? People usually consider a pure cooperative one in which workers own, for the most part, the same percentages of ownership, and it's democratically controlled. But there are hybrid models where it's just as you're suggesting, maybe there are a few people, whether or not those folks are even investors, even, or whether or not they're legacy owners who will retain a certain percentage of ownership that's higher than everyone else. And hopefully that's done with a sense of walking down the road of having equal ownership at some point. But of course, if someone has owned a business for 10, 15, 20 years, and part of the work that they want to do is to turn it over as a cooperative, but they are the ones who've had the experience. They know the accounting, quote unquote. They know who all the dead bodies are. They know, the taxes that are filed, what works, what doesn't work, what needs repairs, whatever it is. So it's going to take them that much more work to even get it ready to hand over fully. And then you have again, when it's a legacy business, you still have to have the idea of who is really interested in sticking this out, right? So
Sure.
if it's a worker who seems to be dedicated, what is a timeline for introducing that worker from being a salaried worker to someone who continues to get a salary, but also begins to share in profit and shares in management, right? What is the steps for that to happen under a way that feels safe for the current owner in the sense of I poured my heart and soul into this business for a certain amount of time, and I just don't want to quote unquote sort of open up the gates to give it to anybody. So
Yeah.
what is the way in which I walk those steps, and what is the way for the worker to feel like they're not necessarily being exploited or strung along? So it's not like,
Sure.
oh, first gonna start you off at 1%, right? Which is not really much of an ownership interest. And then over time, individually, you can go to 3%, and we'll put a cap on it. But I'll always retain, even as I bring in other worker owners, 51% of the company, right? So under that guise, for the most part, that's not going to be a cooperative, because if someone still retains 51%, they can never be
Sure.
outvoted, right? They can always make the final decisions and just consult with other folks who are a minority ownership. But that's not really the idea about what a cooperative is supposed to do, because it keeps too much power in one particular person and or entity's hands, as opposed to sharing that power, sharing that wealth fully amongst the worker ownership. And I will say quickly also, you can also have differentiating structures where ownership interest and percentage of revenue shared or profit shared looks different, right? Just because I own 45% of the company doesn't necessarily mean I get 45% of the revenue at some point. You can play with those numbers as much as you want, as long as it's written down in either your bylaws or it's written down in your minutes that you take as sort of official minutes of the ownership of the company, of the organization slash cooperative meeting and making those decisions. So it could be clearly referred to if anybody differs from what was agreed to.
Kamau, are there, I know Google, just holds the answers to all, so I'm going to ask this question. What resources can you think of for a small business owner to be able to, see what a bylaw, looks like for other cooperatives and be able to convert it, to their business or to their brand? Are there resources out there available? Because I know a traditional business or commercial business is thinking about that operating agreement, and just the concept of bylaws might be something that a business owner is not familiar with. Where can we point business owners who are considering a cooperative to head over to, to seek out samples or just information about bylaws?
I'm forgetting the name of Ronnie's organization that he previously had worked at, but they are a good. Maybe if he's talking in the chat, he might put that in there. But they are, I think, a good organization. By extension, I think one of the organizations they work with was called Evergreen. But they're a good organization that has and or will supply at times model cooperative bylaws. I'm also a resource of some bylaws that are cooperative in nature and or operating agreements for LLCs that are different from standard ones, which are cooperative in nature. I think maybe if he did put that in the chat, that could be one example of a place that we can go to. I think like you said, Google. There's some searches for other nonprofits that will supply you with models. There's even some law firms that specialize in cooperative development. And so I think there's some quick looks that I think again there's a I would say nonprofit structure that is particularly interested in making sure that cooperatives have a chance in terms of surviving. So I think there's some different places to look offhand.
And so our good friend Romel just popped in. He has a business that kind of has some cooperative intentional practices, where he has a business where it's a global travel company where we're able to go and visit indigenous communities, but we're actually able to support those people in that community versus being extractive. And so Romel and even Ronnie practice what Ronnie calls radical hospitality, which I think is just an amazing concept. So shout out to him. Kamau, I want to ask you, one of my favorite facts is I love, Black history, is 1907, W. Du Bois and the American Negro reported that there were, I think, 163 cooperatives that existed right here in Atlanta, with the majority of them being, Black women owned. So they were cooperatives, mutual aid societies. And so that is a part of our history and our legacy. I talk about that all the time. What do you think happened from this space of everyone just knowing that Black excellence was rooted in doing things in a community-based or cooperative way? What happened from then, to now? And I think I know I'm going to know the answer. I'm laughing already because I know you come out personally.
Um, it's in some ways it's a complicated answer, but it's an important answer. It was the civil rights struggle that ended segregation and opened up in some ways the ability of Black folks to shop in white stores and with white companies and so forth, right? And so obviously there's some good to having living. Obviously, you live in a country, you want it to be as open as possible for you to shop and buy and use your resources anywhere you would like to use them, right? So on one end, of course, that opening created those opportunities, but on the other end, we unfortunately as a people sort of brought into the idea that because we were allowed to sort of shop, enter, buy into these establishments, that they therefore were the better establishments, and there was sort of like there was not as much need for us to depend on each other, for us to work together, for us to struggle together, and we in turn sort of destroyed not necessarily a thriving economic system, but one that was based on keeping us alive, to be honest. One that provided some economic uplift, to use a word that folks would like to use for that kind of stuff, for community. One perfect example of this is when you look at the so-called Negro baseball leagues and the integration of the so-called major leagues. Basically, you had black-owned baseball teams go out of business. They didn't get to integrate into the major leagues. They didn't take 3 teams, 4 teams, and create black ownership within the larger structure. The major leagues basically rated players. Black baseball players wanted to play in bigger sports stadium, more better finance sports stadium, better finance teams, and then we therefore, without a lot of thought in the process, to be honest, let those things fall apart for the most part, let those things die as we contributed resources to the larger economy, which is controlled by white business interests. And I think even today, even as we have this discussion, black businesses, represent a intensible a part of the larger economic structure. Most black businesses are either single employee or owner businesses without employees, and so we've effectively sort of run ourselves out of business, cooperative and or otherwise, and have now become dependent on larger white structures. And I think there is now a burgeoning momentum. Obviously, there was a time in the 60s in terms of the Black Power movement, which was sort of taken over by sort of a larger capitalist interest of like, it's all about us as individuals. We want to get paid. It's not about the larger community. We just wanted to open up to have some money. But I think there is starting to be a more of a return by black folks thinking about it in a collective function, right? A collective fashion. That the structures that we left behind to try to get involved in larger white structures are still failing us 40 years later. Whether or not those be business structures, government structures, other institutional structures, education structures. And unless we begin to build structures that we control so that we can control the product, the environment, what gets taught in those structures and those institutions, we will always be dependent on other folks for our livelihood, our income, revenue generation, and so forth. So I think there is a little bit of a return to that. It has to be done with some financial muscle, some political ideas to make it so that it doesn't just turn into a black capitalist scheme
Sure.
that never really distributes wealth to anybody and does what we have now, creates a small pocket of black wealth, a little a pocket of middle class black wealth, but the majority of us are still living either in poverty or working class. We have to think about alternative structures as a people that really do something to make sure wealth gets distributed to our folks, that we can build again and have ownership within our community, so that we're not depending on other folks who can always shut us down anytime they think we've gone too far.
Sure, sure. Ramel left a comment. He said, "We didn't do this all by ourselves. White people help destroy our communities through domestic terrorism and racist policies." And it makes me think about, Kamau, when we look at some of those great communities, when we think of, Tulsa, right here, Auburn Avenue, Black Wall Street, all over, Durham, North Carolina, kind of pops into my head. And what we see is this very systematic approach of destroying of the community. One of the elders, I just can't think about his name right now, shared that if you look at statistically of the black men who were lynched, there was a higher majority that those black men were business owners. And that's something that just struck me because I just learned that particular fact on this atrocity, which is already just something that is just this, horrendous thing. But then to think about just how systematically and designed that was. And so my question is, do you think we could ever have those Black Wall Streets, happen again without cooperative economics?
I don't. Well, a couple of quick things. I don't think we could ever have that happen without a political structure that is militant, that has security apparatuses, to be honest, to go a little bit beyond cooperatives, to
Sure.
protect anything that we build.
Mm, mm-hmm.
So we have to think about holistically as a people, what does it mean to build wealth, particularly next to a group of people, of a capitalist institution minded folks whose very nature is, in terms of this institution, is to be the top dog, to knock down anything
To
that
destroy.
doesn't serve its purpose, right? To knock down, destroy, manipulate, control. When we look at some examples, not only in the Black world but other places around the planet, when you look at the rise of China, whatever you think about its economic system, its politics, what the West hates about China is that it's competing and it has an economic system which is not based on a Western model and they don't control. One of the reasons when you look at Cuba, that it's been under embargo for 50 or 60 years, it's not that Cuba has any military might to destroy the United States. Is that the idea of having an alternative, an example of economic development outside the capitalist system is something that the capitalists do not want to have. They want you to be dependent and subservient to their larger interests. And so, vis-a-vis, when we talk about Black Wall Street, and we talk about the destroying and murdering of Black people and Black towns and Black economics, what you're talking about is whether or not it's done through a structural lens or whether or not it's done through group racism. It's still looked upon as a way of putting Black people in their place and keeping us in a certain place, which doesn't allow us to have control over not only our politics, our economics, our schooling, a sense of independence and self-determination. That's the, whether or not folks openly these days come out and say it like that, that's really what a part of this battle is, even around cooperative economics. It's whether or not we can develop institutions that we control, that we therefore know where those resources go. We don't have to bargain with people around what's better for our community. We don't have
Sure.
to get into them around what's better for our community. We don't have to ask anybody's advice on what's better for our community. We can have those fights amongst ourselves.
Sure.
But currently, as things are constructed, there's hardly anything that we can do in the Black community that's not dependent upon white wealth, whether or not that's independent institutions that are nonprofits, whether or not that's for profits and wealth borrowing, whether or not that's individual structures that we have created. We are totally subservient in some ways to larger white interests. And I will say even more than that, to larger white liberal interests around what's best for our community and what is allowed, right? Conservatives will just come out and they are the ones who will come out and destroy a Rosewood, destroy a Black Wall Street. Liberals will lend us money and then tell us what to do with that money to make sure that it stays subservient to the larger interests of the society that
Sure.
they helped to build, that they still want to be in control of.
Wow, that's you dropped some gems there. You dropped some gems there. And I think even in the conversations and planning that we're having, here at the Connect, we're spending a lot of time on developing those bylaws and that operating agreement. But you just made me think about one of the first things that you said, in your response to this question was about what is the response, politically to having a Black Wall Street as it relates to cooperative economics, and then that security piece, right? So I think that is something that we have watched examples, in our communities of businesses going on to do great things, but what happens when it's too great, or what happens when that business starts to do things that's just not under the spirit of just what empire is or what capitalism is. And so that is definitely some things to kind of think about. I also want to just jump back to systematically, we know that all these things have been done, to us. Integration, segregation, I do feel fall on the side of looking at the impact of what integration really was for our community, and looking at it from this lens, understanding how it was, detrimental to us, as a community, as it relates to our wealth, legacy building, and things like that. What do you think? What circumstances do you think presented itself during that era that it was just a given for cooperative economics? Besides, you could only shop, with Black businesses. I'm pretty sure, Mr. Leroy, way back in the day when he had his barbershop, next to, Mr. Charles, there was, some conflicting personalities, and things. What do you think made it so different during those times for folks just to be able to come together to be able to make that reach?
I mean, I think the sense
Or not make
of,
that reach. I'm sorry, I didn't ask that question correctly. For to be able to really collectively work, kind of in this. This is all we got. This is how we're going to do, and how maybe get back to that.
I think there was a sense of collective unity, let's say, or a need to rely upon each other more, right? Because there was the overt danger of white supremacy that could strike at any moment. So the idea that violence could be visited down was one thing, but also the idea that economic injustice was a day-to-day placeholder for how people lived, right? So if we didn't practice mutual aid, if we didn't practice cooperative enterprises, we would not have survived, right, during those time periods, because the need was not only there, but it was that sense of we're in this by ourselves, and who knows when things are going to get better, if they will get better. So there was again, it's this ideological sense of we are together in this, and we need to make sure that the person down the block doesn't starve necessarily. And so, yeah, obviously, some of this is a sense of a community under strife that operates like this. But I think one of the reasons, again, after like 50 years post the civil rights era, again, you look at the lack thereof of wealth generation in the Black community, the lack of true growth in Black businesses, even if we have more Black businesses, sort of the growth in terms of it's in the economy. When you look at the idea that we're going to integrate into somebody else's system and they're going to somehow open up and give us actual ownership as opposed to give what's called, sort of a diversity interest, right? So, sure, of course, as long as we have a few people that have some top positions and it looks good, then we can say that there's an open economy. But again, the statistics are overwhelming around first hired, first fired. It's around pay differentials, non high school educated whites still on average make more than college educated blacks in some areas. So you have all of these things that still take place in this economy. And I think there's, again, some of this is connected to some of the police brutality struggles that happened over the last 6 or 7 years. But again, it's just the idea that we've walked this walk as far as we can with a system that is constantly sort of changing the game and the rules to keep us subservient. And so, therefore, if it's not going to happen there, and for somebody like me, I never had hope it would anyway. But for those who gave up hope because they had it in the first place, they're trying to come home now and do some stuff. The idea is that this cooperative businesses and structures can not only help you support your family, but again, they can help the person down the block support their family. They can help keep our communities intact. They can help us be more neighborly again, right? Help us
Sure.
rely on each other and look out for each other, and not even in some romanticized vision of it, but in a sense that we are sort of, to use integrating in a positive light, that we are integrating our lives with one another in a way that we understand that the accumulation of wealth by one does not mean that it's good for the larger community, that only through a shared wealth program can we make sure that our larger community and therefore our educational needs, our safety needs, and are all met because we are looking out for each other and we are making sure that, again, that we are making sure that people have places to live, places to work, adequate schools and so forth. And again, I only believe that's going to get accomplished through the idea of cooperative and or collective working together as a people to make that happen.
So come out a couple of questions in our comments. One, we have, are co-ops able to benefit from COVID relief packages? There was also a question about talking about the role of technology in creating economic opportunities, for cooperatives, for small Black businesses. I'm going to just kind of group those together. Both those questions, they're from the same person. If you could expand, but I think just kind of start off, are co-ops able to benefit from any of the COVID relief packages?
Yeah, I mean, just like any other small businesses, cooperatives are definitely eligible. You just have to look at whatever particular government program is open. They don't necessarily have to be specialized towards cooperatives. They'll just have to be specialized towards small businesses, and usually that's connected to revenue of the business, not necessarily the structure of the business. In fact, there may be additional things that a cooperative that is a nonprofit could benefit from that other businesses couldn't. So yes, in the sense of whatever is open for small businesses, they're getting loans which at some point may not have to be paid back even. People should do sort of their due diligence and search online for the different programs that are open. The structures again of the small businesses probably shouldn't matter. I think technology is, as in all businesses, play a major role in cooperatives. The technology of social media, right? Not even something too deep, but the idea that you can run marketing campaigns based on social media as opposed to highly paid for commercials, right? It's sort of changed sort of a landscape, particularly for small businesses to do a little bit more than what they probably could have done 15 or 20 years ago in terms of growth of their business. So I think there are technologies out there that we have to look at. We look at the technologies of apps and how they've changed business landscapes, not necessarily for the better, but I think cooperatives can also use some of those same tools. And sometimes these tools are neutral, right? It's just about how they are applied. So you can look at some of these tools around app development, how do you use social media for marketing to make sure that you can try to get your business to expand. And to be real, some of it is, when you think about businesses, again, it's old-fashioned hustle, right? It's like, what can you do to promote your business so that a wider array of customers will come into your doors, whether virtual or physical doors, because the service and or product you are selling reaches enough folks so that it covers your costs and makes a profit. Well, that only happens if you are able to reach a group of people. And so those things are not just necessarily about a capitalist business or whatever. Anytime you have a market-based economy, and a market-based economy doesn't necessarily have to be strictly around sort of a capitalist thinking model, but anytime you have a market-based economy, whether or not those businesses are cooperatives or not, there's some standard ideas that will apply around how do you get the revenue share of that business to increase, right? And so whether or not the structure is more egalitarian or not, you still have to follow some of those basic business principles on growing your business.
And one thing that was great, Kamal, and also kind of add on to this technology piece. Our team, we have been doing some research and discovered there are several community wealth building apps that are based in the premise of susus. Not the multi-level marketing scam y'all all got caught up into the last season of the pandemic, but the traditional community wealth building premise of collectively pulling your resources together. And we were excited to discover that there were several black-owned apps that you could actually create this digital susu community collective savings amongst a small group and a large group. And there were several that were actually designed by black techs. So just I would say for that technology piece, what I have been excited to discover is that these same cooperative principles are still founded and rooted in just what we do naturally as black folks. And so we're going to be sharing some of that as we kind of grow, because we're really looking into launching some of that or utilizing one of these systems in the fall for that. But I would say, Mark last night when we were having this conversation, he was like, "My mama ain't need no app to do a susu," but it's just great to be able to see in that tech space that we're taking. Thank you, Romel. Season 1 of the Pandora. Yeah, I think it was season 1 of the Pandora that the susu scam came out. But we know that that is something that we can kind of start to kind of build those relationships. Because in my head, the biggest thing or challenge when it comes to thinking about the cooperative is just strengthening the relationships, strengthening our relationship, to money. We all have a different idea and concept. I was sharing earlier that, being a person that grew up in that kind of post-Reagan crack era type time, my relationship with money looks a whole lot different. It's, on that, rooted in that kind of survival mode, because we just saw different things happening with family members that maybe, it was just it was wild, y'all, during those times. It was just a different time. And so we know that everyone has a different approach and a different relationship. And so we're really looking to having some real honest conversations and some dialogue about that, because I still go back to whatever I experienced in the Reagan's, crack era pandemic definitely was not what Mr. Charles experienced in the 1920s. Like, let's be very real about that, right? And so I think we're trying to really look to explore, what that looks like, and be able to utilize, those tools. So Kamau, here you are 20 years later, right? Even though, that means you're 26, right? 20 years later, doing this work, um, what are the things when you think about cooperative, economics that kind of just brings you joy as we look to the future in terms of what the work that Community Movement Builders is doing?
And before I answer that question, so I wanted you mentioned something really important about susus. People uh, don't remember and or don't practice or participate, let's say, at the level that we once did in sort of that, again, that collective wealth building. Susus
Yes.
were a very important part of the Black Southern experience and Northern experience to help people pay their rents, to help pay a phone bill, again, to even help raise resources. And not only the Black American experience, the Black experience of folks in experience of Black folks in America, but a lot of times when folks think about, this the old battle between sort of immigrants who come here and they work hard and they're thrifty and sort of the folklore of that and how come we are not like that, blah 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 blah. What people don't understand a lot of times too, and some of this has been documented, is that those immigrant communities themselves have a basis, and they don't necessarily call them susus, but they have a susu-based system that helps get
Sure.
them resources to do things like open up corner stores. Right? People
Mm-hmm.
don't realize that. They don't look into that. This is not just about a hard work ethic. This is about access to resources. And a lot of
Sure.
times, some folks come over here, and some of the governments from the countries they came from sometimes supply loans or things like that. And sometimes it's that reciprocal approach of like people who come here and work odd jobs, obviously send a lot of money back to where they come from, and then they help sell some of the businesses locally. So I just wanted to say that Susu, the idea of building wealth collectively has a history as well as with in terms of that cooperative thinking that again we
Sure.
need to explore. We need to be careful about. There's some legalities around it that we don't pay attention to, and as long as we keep it at a certain size, we don't have to. But always be careful, a little careful about it. But susus are a great way if you have the resources to put aside to help build wealth. Now, on community movement builders and the stuff that I enjoy doing um, after 30 years, not unfortunately not 20, but 30 of organizing is it's the idea of working with people and not only folks who are organizers and activists who are new at it, who are trying to figure out ways to create things, but again working with folks who are from the very communities that I came from. I'm from the projects in Brooklyn, working class community in Crown Heights, Bed-Stuy. It's how do we collectively find ways to sort of dig ourselves out of holes that a lot of times we had no we would put ourselves in those holes in the first place, right? But those are the circumstances that we were born or lived in, and so we have to figure that out. And so the joy for me of figuring that out with people is a lot of energy, a lot of strength. I still love to meet new people. I still love to talk and discuss new ideas, figure out new strategies, build structures that I can see growing. And sometimes even in failure, you find success because you figure out what it is that you did that did not happen the way it should have happened, and so where you can go the next time and make sure it happens in a good way. So I think as long as for me, sort of that enjoyment of planning and plotting and figuring out and seeing something build still brings me sort of the energy that I need to continue to do this work. It'll be the work that I do for the rest of my life.
Thank you. And hold on, y'all. We are over here at the Connect, and that big old furnace just turned on, so Mark is going to turn it off. So we were trying to like very expeditiously turn it off. So Mark is going to turn it off, and it'll take a few seconds for it to go off. But with that, Kamau, I think some of my thoughts are around just being really excited to be able to connect with folks like you that are for real about this life, right? You and I were on a panel discussion a couple of weeks ago where we were talking about the impact of watching gentrification happen in our neighborhoods, real time. There was an open house that was scheduled, and you, along with community folks that live in Pittsburgh, rolled up on that open house in your neighborhood to be able to stand up, and sing my favorite song that's at the top of the charts, that Liar, Liar, Gentrifier song, right? And so I just love just really going out and having this type of activism. I get excited by the young folks that are really making some demands and really just trying to reconnect to just some of the things that are really in us, from our core. And so I think when I look at how cooperatives, can work, and how they are working, we do it all the time. As you were sharing about, other immigrant, communities, I encourage folks, if there is a convenience store where that convenience store has a liquor license or a nail shop, that is literally a generational passed on business. For those of you all who live in our community, we stand before those neighborhood meetings where that new owner, when that person arrives here, there's a transfer of ownership to that brother, to that uncle. And so that is something, when you mention doing it at a level that really makes an impact, I think that's how I tie it back into, if you have that restaurant that's like that corner wing spot that is an institution. We've seen too many of our institutions just, die out. And I think there's a space for us to really look at what you said, being able to convert that business over to a cooperative, to really do it in a space that it really makes an impact. And when I think of, some of our favorite restaurants that, used to be here, that are no longer here, just what are some things that we can do? And I think that is a tool and a resource. We watch it here in Westview and West End every single month when there's a transfer of ownership from the convenience store with the liquor license to the beauty supply store. That beauty supply store gets flipped 5, 10 times in one family. So I think when we look at how can it be done at a level that really makes an impact, we have those living examples right in our community. And so I just really want people to continue to have the conversation, to really dig deep into what we can do. If you're a family, your uncle, somebody has that car detailing business, I think sometimes as even families, we don't value our other family members, business. And I think that's something that we can start looking into, right now. Kamau, what can we look forward to for community movement builders in the future?
I think some of the things that you can look forward to from us is one, an expansion of our cooperative business. So, it's great that we've gotten the CMOS cooperative off the ground. I didn't speak about, we have a security cooperative that is a security slash cop watch cooperative. And so we always try to mend or meld the political with the economic. So our security slash cop watch cooperative walks the streets of Pittsburgh and Southwest Atlanta to guard against police brutality and to provide safety patrols for folks, that we can do conflict de-escalation if there's any conflicts that happen, and try to make sure that we raise the resources to employ young adults from the community, so that they can be a part of the security cooperative, and then also be a part of the security cooperatives, they worker owner, who can actually get security jobs and investigative jobs. So look for an expansion of that. Again, our CMOS cooperative, we are on the verge of getting into some other stores. We're building out a website that people can buy our product online. And so that's going to be getting bigger. So I think those things are really important for us. On the political action side, we are joining with other organizations to do a huge demonstration on March 28th, not only across the country, but across the Western Hemisphere, around U.S. out of Haiti, and Haiti being able to be self-determining and self-sustaining. And speaking of cooperative lifestyles and self-sustainability, Haiti is in the condition it's in today, because the West refused to let an enslaved society win its freedom and liberation and then be self-sufficient. What it did is it blockaded Haiti, it put tariffs on Haiti, and it stopped trading with Haiti, all to make it subservient to the larger capitalist class, and to create an internal capitalist class that relies on the U.S. government and other Western nations for its wealth and so forth. And so we want to do everything that we can to break that bond, of slavery again. And we actually are doing work with a Haitian political party to build a self-sustaining enterprise in Haiti as we speak. So, continue to look for us to operate in both political circles and economic circles and social circles. We don't think we should be limited to any of that as a people. One of the things I want to stop and say that I love about you and Mark is that you guys reach out to Black folks. You do work with other Black organizations and institutions. You try to make sure as much as possible that you're bringing the family along with these great opportunities and institutions that you're building. And I'm just grateful to have gotten to met you guys and to work with you guys and to do a lot of future stuff because I think you are the sort of future of our people in our community because you're showing with economic development, political development, social development really looks like in real time. And I think that's something to uphold and be particularly proud of here in this day and age.
Well, thank you, thank you, thank you. So before we leave, I just want to share. I think I did get to the questions and the comments. I want to share. We dropped a link. There's a survey that we would love for everyone to be able to participate in and fill out. If you're interested in recapping this video, if you didn't get a chance to log in for the first session or for the first part of the session or any of the prior sessions, you can head over to theconnect.com to be able to view all of the videos that we have. We did have a request from one of our viewers last week to upload all of the episodes from season 3 of the pandemic from last year that we did, and we will do that. We're still working on that. And so you can find all of our information on the website, but please fill out that survey. I'm thinking from the feedback that we have on here, we most definitely will be doing a class to kind of dig a little deeper on our bylaws and operating agreement and try and bring Kamau back just to kind of hone in on that because I think there's an opportunity that we need to kind of spend some more time with as a community who is interested in understanding with cooperatives. Kamau, as always, it is a great, great, great time having you hang out. I have this smile on my face because Kamau is an amazing, amazing, amazing brother. And I love the way that he led this class. Follow him on Community Movement Builders. Kamau, can you share any upcoming volunteer opportunities, support? How can we stay connected with Community Movement Builders?
Sure. So I think the best way to stay connected with us is on our social media, Twitter, Community Movement Builders, Facebook, and Instagram. We also on our website have info at communitymovementbuilders.org. If you are a Black person and you're interested in doing political, social, community work, if you have an ideology that's not about you as an individual, but that's about doing work in the community, that's all you need. You don't got to be the most politicized person. You just got to be able to sort of walk the walk with us, make mistakes the way we're going to make mistakes, hold us by the hand as we hold you by the hand, and be forgiving and loving and work with each other. And if you can do that, we'd love to sort of add folks to our membership, our network, and folks that we do good work with. And so, again, it's a pleasure to be with you guys, and thanks for having me.
Come out. What is that shirt you have on, and where can we cop that?
So y'all can cop this. I think it should be on the website, communitymovementbuilders.org. We have a store, which of course helps support the organization. You can make a donation there, all that kind of good stuff. So that stuff is on the website. And if people have personal requests for things that they see and it's not on the website, but they've seen it on sort of social media, I'll give Kamau Franklin at gmail.com and I can make it happen. You know what I'm saying? That's what I do. Oh,
We
let me also say,
appreciate
I'm sorry. Oh, no, I'm really sorry about this. So I'm going to be beat up if I don't say this. So another collective enterprise that we're working on is called Black Power Media.
Yes.
Blackpowermedia.org. Check it out. It's where we are creating a narrative about Black folks as an alternative to mainstream narrative. As folks may or may not know, I co-host a podcast called Renegade Culture. We have joined with some other folks to do a larger grouping called Black Power Media on YouTube. Follow us as Black Power Media. Brother Jared Ball, I mix with a like. Dr. Sharice Burton Stelly, the Last Dope Intellectual, the Lukeman Nation, and some other folks too. So we're doing that good work, putting out that
Yes.
narrative. creating our own media. I don't want to get beat up on my people, but for not saying that. So thank you for that.
And so, Kamau, as we finish up, if you don't mind just dropping those links in our comments, we'll have this live. You guys, thank you. We had a blast hanging out with you all these last three sessions. I always learn something not only from our speakers, but from those in the comments. I feel like we had the best attendees virtually ever because y'all came with those comments. We appreciate it. Again, make sure you fill out that survey so we could really hear what worked, what didn't work, and also what you want to hear from us as we continue these virtual sessions. Again, I just want to tell Brother Kamau Franklin, thank you so much for joining us. We'll make sure that we have you back. Everyone stay tuned here at the Connect. This will be our last session for the Open for Good Business. We will be returning next quarter for our Hustle and Grow series to be able to expand the conversation. But also in the meantime, we are building out our space. We're trying, with these two pennies we got that we're going to rub together and make some magic happen. Our goal is for us to be open late June, July. So again, we want to tell you all thank you so much for joining us for this Open for Good Business. Head on over to theconnect.com to be able to see this full episode. This episode will be available on our Facebook page. Please continue to share it with the folks that are out there. Again, for Kamau, for Mark that is behind there on the producing side, we thank you guys so much, and we will see you out in the community.